Have you ever wondered why, when an empath finally chooses peace, everyone seems to disappear? It's not because they stopped caring. It's because they stopped absorbing everyone else's pain. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And when empaths finally honor that truth, the world they once carried on their shoulders begins to crumble. But what looks like loneliness is actually the beginning of liberation. Empaths move through life like emotional sponges, quietly absorbing the energy of everyone around them. They walk into a room and instantly sense what others feel: the tension behind a forced smile, the sadness hidden beneath polite words, the exhaustion no one dares to show. To the empath, emotions are not invisible. They are loud, living frequencies that vibrate through the air, shaping how they see and experience the world. From childhood, many empaths were the ones who comforted crying friends, mediated family conflicts, or took the blame to keep the peace. Their gift of emotional perception became their survival strategy. Carl Jung might say that this sensitivity is born from an overdeveloped feeling function, a psychological orientation deeply attuned to the inner lives of others. It is both a gift and a burden. Over time, the empath learns to measure their own worth through the emotions of those around them. When others are calm, they feel safe. When others are angry or sad, they feel responsible. This constant emotional vigilance becomes exhausting. Yet, because empathy is their default language, they often don't notice how much energy they give away just to keep the world balanced. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to society. For many empaths, that mask is the healer, the good listener, or the one who understands. Behind that persona, however, hides the true self, the part of them that longs for silence, space, and authenticity. But the more the empath tries to keep everyone else comfortable, the further they drift from who they really are. What begins as compassion quietly turns into self-erasure. The empath becomes a character in other people's stories, a supporting role in their dramas, heartbreaks, and crises. They become the emotional first responder, showing up for others before being asked, offering warmth even when no one returns it. Outwardly, they seem kind, patient, and wise. Inwardly, they are tired, drained, and misunderstood. This constant emotional labor takes a toll. The empath's nervous system becomes overstimulated. They start to feel anxious in crowds, irritated by loud noises, and fatigued after simple interactions. Sometimes they even mistake other people's emotions for their own. They wake up sad without knowing why, only to realize later they absorbed a friend's sorrow like a sponge. Jung might describe this as psychic contamination, when boundaries between self and other become blurred. For the empath, peace often feels unreachable. They crave connection, but are overwhelmed by it. They want to help, but helping leaves them empty. They yearn to be understood, yet they rarely show their inner world because they fear burdening others. Their compassion becomes both armor and prison. But something begins to shift when the empath reaches emotional exhaustion. It starts with a quiet realization: I can't keep doing this. They start noticing patterns. The one-sided friendships that only exist when someone needs advice, the partners who love their empathy but never return it, the family members who depend on them to absorb tension but never offer calm in return. These patterns are not coincidences. They are psychological mirrors. Jung would say that the world is reflecting their inner imbalance back to them. When the empath finally sees this, they begin the process Jung called individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, authentic self. This is not a comfortable process. It requires peeling away the layers of false identity built through years of people-pleasing and emotional servitude. It means questioning every belief they held about love, worth, and responsibility. The empath starts to understand that being kind does not mean being available to everyone. They realize that love without boundaries is not love, it is self-abandonment. For the first time, They feel the urge to protect their own peace, to withdraw from constant emotional exchange, and to listen to their own inner voice. But as soon as they begin to do this, the world around them reacts. Friends accuse them of being distant. Family members say they've changed. People who once depended on their empathy start to feel uncomfortable. That's because the empath is no longer operating as the emotional caretaker. They are shifting from external validation to internal alignment. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the self begins to emerge, the part of the psyche that seeks harmony between what we show to the world and who we truly are. For the empath, this awakening feels like both liberation and loss. They begin to see that much of their identity was built around fixing others, and without that role, they must rediscover who they are when no one needs saving. This stage is fragile yet profound. The empath begins to crave solitude, quiet, and reflection. They may feel isolated, but deep down, something sacred is happening. They are learning to hear themselves again. This is the first step toward peace, but it also marks the beginning of a painful truth. When an empath chooses peace, not everyone will choose to stay. And though they don't yet understand it, that loss is not the end of their story. It is the doorway to their freedom, the point where their empathy stops being a burden and starts becoming wisdom. When an empath finally decides to choose peace, the world they once held together begins to fall apart. The people who relied on their endless understanding start to drift away. The relationships that once felt like home suddenly feel heavy and unfamiliar. At first, this confuses and hurts the empath deeply. How could choosing something as pure as peace lead to so much loss? The truth is, peace changes your energy, and energy changes everything. For years, the empath has been operating on survival mode, feeding everyone else's emotional hunger while starving their own soul. Their vibration, as Jung might describe it, has been tuned to chaos. They have been unconsciously drawn to people and situations that reflect their unhealed need to be needed. When they finally heal that wound, the resonance breaks. The people who thrived on their emotional labor feel the shift and start to withdraw. It is not that those people are inherently bad. They were simply aligned with the version of the empath who gave without limit. They were comfortable with the healer, not the human. But once the empath begins to value their inner peace more than constant giving, those connections lose their foundation. Jung believed that what you resist persists. The empath spent years resisting their own needs, suppressing their anger, avoiding confrontation, and fearing rejection. But when they stop resisting and start honoring themselves, the entire dynamic must transform, and sometimes that means ending. At first, the empath blames themselves. They wonder if they become cold or selfish. They question whether they're doing something wrong. After all, they built their identity around being the safe place for others. But now, as they stop absorbing pain that isn't theirs, the roles reverse. They are no longer the mirror reflecting everyone else's emotions. They have turned that mirror inward, and that's something not everyone can handle. In Jungian terms, this marks the confrontation with the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche that holds everything we suppress: anger, boundaries, pride, and truth. For empaths, the shadow is often made of feelings they've been taught to reject. They've been told that anger makes them unkind, boundaries make them cruel, and self-respect makes them selfish. But these traits are not flaws. They are survival instincts waiting to be reclaimed. When the empath embraces their shadow, they begin to integrate it into their consciousness. They start saying no without guilt. They recognize manipulation where they once saw love. They stop chasing approval and begin seeking authenticity. This shift terrifies those who depended on their compliance. People who once praised the empath for their kindness now accuse them of being distant. But that's because the empath has finally stopped bleeding for connection. Jung compared individuation to descending into the underworld, a necessary descent into darkness to discover the hidden parts of the self. For the empath, this descent often looks like isolation. They spend nights wondering why no one checks in anymore, why old friends don't call, why relationships crumble after boundaries are set. It's a lonely silence, but it's not emptiness, it's space. It's the quiet needed to rebuild the self from the inside out. During this time, the empath learns an important truth. Not everyone who leaves is meant to be lost. Some people exit because their role in your growth is complete. Others leave because your new energy no longer validates their wounds. Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." When the empath stops absorbing everyone else's pain, those people are forced to face themselves, and that's something many aren't ready for. The empath begins to notice who remains. A few souls stay, not because they need the empath's light, but because they carry their own. These are the rare, conscious connections built on mutual respect rather than emotional dependency. These relationships feel different, lighter, freer, and more balanced. There's no performance, no silent expectations, no guilt. Just presence. This stage of loss slowly transforms into a stage of clarity. The empath starts to understand that losing people is not the same as losing love. It's losing distortion. The people who truly resonate with their peace will never require them to shrink. They will not see their boundaries as rejection, but as maturity. They will love the empath not for how much pain they can carry, but for the calm they radiate. As the empath embraces this truth, they begin to feel a strange relief. The exhaustion that once clung to them starts to fade. The silence that once felt like abandonment begins to feel sacred. The emptiness turns into openness. This is the paradox of peace. To gain it, you must be willing to lose everything that cannot exist within it. In Jung's language, this transformation is the union of opposites, the integration of what was once fragmented. The empath merges their light with their shadow, their love with their strength, their compassion with their truth. They no longer live to heal others. They live to honor their own wholeness. The world will not always understand this. Some will call it detachment, others will call it ego. But the empath knows better now. Peace is not the absence of love, it is the maturity of it. It is the moment you stop sacrificing your soul to keep others comfortable and start choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of sacred necessity. And though it may seem like they've lost everyone, the empath has finally found the one person they had been searching for all along, themselves. When the storm finally passes, something extraordinary begins to happen. The empath, who once carried the weight of everyone else's emotions, starts to experience a kind of stillness they've never known before. It's not silence born from emptiness, but peace born from alignment. For the first time in years, they can breathe without feeling the tension of someone else's pain pressed against their chest. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." The empath's inner world, once chaotic with noise and emotional clutter, begins to reorganize itself into something sacred. Peace feels strange at first. After years of intensity, stillness can seem almost uncomfortable. The empath's nervous system, so used to scanning for danger or distress, doesn't know what to do with calm. They might even mistake it for boredom or loneliness. But slowly, they learn that this quiet is not absence, it is presence. It is life stripped of noise, reduced to truth. It is the sound of their own soul finally speaking without interruption. In this stage, the empath starts to rediscover who they are outside of everyone else's stories. They realize that they were never just the healer or the listener. They are creators, thinkers, dreamers, and artists. Their empathy, once used to carry others, now fuels their creativity and insight. Jung described this as the movement toward the self, the center of the psyche that integrates all opposites, light and shadow, giving and receiving, love and solitude. The empath is no longer fragmented between who they are and who the world wants them to be. They are whole. This wholeness changes everything. The empath begins to live differently. They no longer say, yes, out of guilt or fear. They no longer confuse love with sacrifice. They start choosing experiences that nourish them instead of depleting them. Their compassion doesn't disappear, it deepens. But it's now guided by wisdom rather than obligation. They help when they can, but not at the expense of themselves. They give without losing balance. Relationships begin to transform as well. The empath's newfound peace becomes a natural filter. It draws in people who match their frequency and repels those who thrive on chaos. The conversations they now have are different, slower, more honest, more meaningful. There's no more pretending, no more walking on emotional eggshells. They have learned to let silence do the work of truth. In this new chapter, the empath also develops a profound respect for solitude. What once felt like loneliness now feels like sanctuary. Solitude becomes the soil where their self-awareness grows deeper roots. Jung believed that solitude was essential for individuation, the space where the unconscious becomes conscious. For the empath, solitude is no longer a punishment for caring too much. It is a reward for finally caring for themselves. With time, peace stops feeling fragile. It becomes their default state, not because life is suddenly free of pain, but because they've learned to remain centered within it. They stop absorbing energy and start observing it. They witness emotions flow through them like waves without drowning in them. This is emotional mastery, not detachment, but discernment. The empath learns to hold space for others without losing themselves in the process. And here lies the deepest transformation. The empath begins to love differently. Their love is no longer rooted in fear, rescue, or dependency. It is grounded in respect and awareness. They love people for who they are, not for who they can fix. They no longer cling to relationships that disturb their peace because they finally understand that peace is love. Love for self, love for truth, love for the divine balance that sustains all things. In this stage, they start attracting kindred spirits, people who are equally self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and capable of standing in their own power. These new connections feel lighter. There's no pressure to perform, no need to heal, no silent scorekeeping. There's mutual giving and receiving, a natural rhythm that flows without effort. These are not relationships of dependency. They are relationships of resonance. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The empath who has chosen peace is no longer directed by unconscious patterns of guilt or fear. They no longer call pain love or confusion connection. They see clearly now. And that clarity is freedom. The most beautiful part of this transformation is that the empath doesn't lose their softness, they refine it. Their empathy evolves from reaction to wisdom. They can still feel deeply, but now they understand the difference between feeling for someone and feeling with someone. The first drains energy, the second shares it. This awareness turns empathy into empowerment. By choosing peace, the empath does not become distant, they become powerful. Their presence calms instead of absorbs, their silence teaches instead of pleases, and their boundaries protect instead of isolate. They stop chasing validation, because they have become their own source of worth. In the end, the empath realizes that they never truly lost anyone. They simply released those who could not meet them in peace. What remains are the few souls who recognize that peace is not weakness, but strength in its purest form. The empath's journey, from emotional chaos to sacred calm, mirrors Jung's vision of the human psyche, the path of wholeness, where the self emerges from shadow and finally stands in its light. And once they reach that place, they no longer carry the world, they simply illuminate it.